Okay.
Take it
So, th-
away.
so this is better than tarot cards any day. So not really, but anyway. So Edgar Cayce, what I want to say about him and the reason why I'm so interested in him is for a number of reasons. First of all, I met my psychic mentor at a Edgar Cayce conference. She tapped me on the shoulder there, and that was it. She taught me, from there, she taught me, took me under her wing and taught me everything I know. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't know Timothy or Danelle or any of you. So
Oh,
I'm grateful for that.
yeah.
Also,
I'm grateful for that too, Ginger.
yeah. And also, my I worked for a holistic doctor in Albuquerque when I was there, and I was working late one night, and I was there by myself, and I had the hallways darkened, and I went to the copy machine, and I went back to my office, and I saw a really scary apparition, really evil, scary apparition. And I just said, you're not here for me. You're here for the girl who works at the front desk, and she'll be back tomorrow. So I come back, and I went in my office and I finished my work. And that's why I went to the Edgar Cayce conference, because I had never seen anything like that. And I wanted to know more about it. And don't you know that this Edgar Cayce conference came to town the following month, called Angels, uh, Demons and Unseen Forces or something. So that's where I met my mentor. Um, so I became, and then I started channeling a couple of years ago. And in one of my channeling classes one night, there were like 6 to 8 of us. And so I was just waiting my turn. And all of a sudden, here comes Edgar Cayce. And he sits down. It's as though, I'm someplace else and we're together there. And suddenly we're in his library at the ARE in Virginia Beach. He's sitting on the table. I'm sitting in a chair. He's smoking a cigarette. And he's saying, "It's because of me that you're here. I just want you to know that. It's because of me that you're here." And I'm like, wow. And he said, "Isn't this the most wonderful work ever? Isn't this the most wonderful thing to be able to do?" And then he just kind of disappeared. But he comes back and forth every now and then, when I'm in channeling class, or even, if I'm meditating. Uh, Friends have asked, well, why don't you ask him to teach you medical intuition? And you know what? If he's meant to teach me medical intuition, he will teach me. I have no doubt, but I'm not going to, pursue that. So I'm famous enough as it is. So, so anyway, Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 in Christian County, Kentucky, in a town named Hopkinsville. People there, this is the Bible Belt. People were very religious back then, and his family were members of the Disciples of Christ. And my sister Ellen knows of them. Very, very conservative Christian organization, evangelical. But I think from the moment that Edgar could pray, he absolutely loved God. He absolutely loved God, and he loved his church. And when he was 10 years old, he asked his dad if he could have a Bible. And his father said, "I will go get one for you." And he went to the pharmacy where they sold Bibles at the time. And when the pharmacist found out it was for his son, who was 10 years old, he said, "It's my gift to him." Edgar read that Bible in 3 years about a dozen times, all the way through from beginning to end. He just couldn't get enough of it. And he also became the sexton of his church and the Sunday school teacher. When he was 10 years old, he was teaching Sunday school, and he was the sexton of the church. So his mom and his father's family were all psychic. It wasn't hidden in the family, but they didn't speak about it publicly too much. But one funny thing was that Edgar's grandfather could make a broom dance. So when they were having parties sometimes and everybody was having a little too much to drink, he might try that trick. So he had his mom, his grandmother, and his grandfather to tell about his psychic experiences. And I'm going to read a couple of stories from this book, There Is a River, about his childhood. And I think they really had an effect on him, and were just little scenes into what his life was to become. So the first thing was about his grandfather. He was really close to his grandmother and grandfather. And this was a very tragic thing that happened to him. They called Edgar Old Man. Everybody called him Old Man. So they were riding across the big field, heading for the barns. The men were in the machinery house repairing a binder, and Grandpa wanted to see how the work was coming. When they came to the pond that sat between the road and the barns, the horse stopped. Better get down, old man, Grandpa said. I'm going to give this fellow a drink. He slid down and ran into the tall grass by the water, glad of the chance to get himself cooled off. It was hot up there on the horse, and with Grandpa cutting off the breeze and the sun coming down on his bare head. His pants were wet from the lather of the horse, and his hands were sweaty from holding Grandpa's belt. He squatted by the edge of the pond and stared into the water, looking for fish. Grandpa walked the horse into the pond and waited while he drank, sitting in the saddle with his hands on his hips. Suddenly, the horse threw up its head, reared, and plunged into deep water. Grandpa held his seat and grabbed the reins, pulling on them with all his strength. The horse swam to the other side of the pond, galloped to the white rail fence surrounding the barns, tried to jump it, failed, and turned back to the pond. Somehow, Grandpa retained his seat. As the horse entered the water a second time, he stumbled and went to his knees. Grandpa was thrown over his head, landing on his back. The horse got to his feet, reared again, and brought his 4 feet down on Grandpa's chest. Then he turned and ran off through the field. Grandpa's head was under the water. Old Man waited for him to get up. He called to him. There was no answer. Grandpa lay still. Old Man ran to get help as fast as he could. And that was, he was probably 6 years old at the time. He got help, and then he ran to his grandmother's house. And his Aunt Patsy was there. And he said to Aunt Patsy, Grandpa's dead, he said. The horse killed him. Now will they put him in the ground and bury him? He'll go to the angels, old man, Patsy said. Mr. TJ was a fine gentleman, and he'll go to the angels. Will I see him again, old man asked. Patsy bent down and peered at him. Sure, you'll see him again, she said. You have the second sight, don't you? So even then, it was known that Edgar could see things that other people couldn't see. Let's see, the next one is, so that was a big hit, but Edgar did see his grandfather a lot. When the family gathered, he would see him walking through the barn, and he wasn't afraid. He was really kind of glad to see him. The next thing about Edgar, so this is about the fairies that he saw all the time. There were plenty of fish too, both in the brooks and in the ponds. In summer, fishing was his greatest joy. Then the days were long and hot, and the men worked in the fields. The women stayed indoors, canning fruits and vegetables. And he had no playmates but his sisters, a new one being born all the time, it seemed to him, until there were 4 of them, Annie, Mary, Ola, and Sarah. From them and their dolls, he was glad to get away for long hours beside the water, dreaming as he waited for a fish to come and take the worm he offered. His little playfolk came to him there to be with him. They were always his size. As he grew older, they grew older. What he wanted to do was always what they wanted to do. Sometimes there were only a few of them. Sometimes there were many. Let's see, one day they would be all boys, another day they would be all girls. They went away when another person came, unless it was little Anna C. She was a neighbor's daughter and just his age. The play folk seemed to like her, and she could see them and even talk with them. She was inquisitive, and one day when it rained and they all ran to the playhouse they had built in the top of one of the barns, she asked the play folk why they didn't get wet. One of them said, "Oh, we can't get wet. We live in the flowers and the music." "What music?" Anna asked. "The music of everything," the little fella said. Once he and Anna waded out to an island in the creek at the back of her father's farm, and there at the water's edge, they found other little folk. But these would have nothing to do with them. They said they had never been boys or girls and would rather play with the dragonflies. So he wondered if the play folk would ever come back after the cold winter. And they did, but Anna and her father both died of pneumonia that winter. And when Edgar went to play, they were there to meet him. He could barely remember the time when he had not known them. He had made a little house under the butterbean vines in the garden, and one day a boy came to play with him. He told his mother about him, but she had not seen him. The next day, the boy came back and brought some others with him. It was after that one day that his mother saw them. He dreaded the day when they would not come to meet him, but when it arrived, he found that he didn't mind. He listened more intently to the calls of the birds and to the other sounds of the woods until the living things around him took the place of his invisible friends. The loneliness he had been afraid of never came. But Edgar would be, as many psychics and people like us experience, he did spend a lot of lonely times in his life. You know how that is. Let's see. So then the next story is about when he meets his angel. Here we go. All right. All right. So quickly did he read. This is talking about his Bible. By his own account, he had been from Adam to John a dozen times by the spring of his 13th year. As soon as the weather was good, he went back to his retreat in the woods. There, one afternoon in May, as he sat at the entrance of the lean-to, reading the story of Manoah, he became aware of the presence of someone else. He looked up. A woman was standing before him. At first, he thought she was his mother, come to bring him home for the chores. The sun was bright, and his eyes did not see well after staring at the book. But when she spoke, he knew it was someone he did not know. Her voice was soft and very clear. It reminded him of music. Your prayers have been heard, she said. Tell me what you would like most of all so that I may give it to you. Then he saw that there was something on her back, something that made shadows behind her that were shaped like wings. He was frightened. She smiled at him, waiting. He was afraid his voice would not make a sound the way it did in dreams. He opened his mouth and heard himself saying, most of all, I would like to be helpful to others and especially to children when they were sick. He was thinking of Jesus and the disciples. He wanted to be like a disciple. Suddenly, she was no longer there. He looked at the place where she had stood, trying to see her in the beams of light, but she was gone. He picked up his Bible and ran home to tell his mother what had happened. And he thought that maybe because he was reading that Bible so much that he had gone crazy. And his mother said, you didn't go crazy. What you actually saw an angel. Now, Edgar's parents, his father's name was Leslie, and they called him the Squire. He, I'm going to say, was a functioning alcoholic. He, could jump from 0 to 60 with anger, but Edgar was a good student until I think his uncle started teaching at the school. It was a little schoolhouse, and his studies kind of fell off, and I'm not sure why that was. But one day, Edgar couldn't spell the word cabin, and he couldn't do it. And his uncle was so irritated with him, so he made Edgar stay after school and write it 500 times on the chalkboard. So when Edgar gets home and his father gets home, his father is screaming. Squire Cayce was furious when he came in. The family was disgraced, he said. Uncle Lucian had told him what a stupid son he had. And the father, that's all he talked about all night. And then after dinner, his father said, you're going to start learning your lessons or I'll know the reason why. He said, sit down here now and get to business. It was a long evening. Time after time, the squire would take the book and ask the lesson, and the answers would be wrong. He would hand back the book and say grimly, all right, I'll ask it again in another half hour. The rest of the family went to bed at 10 o'clock. His father hit him so hard he knocked him out of the chair because he still didn't have the lesson. So he said, Dad, please, one more chance. And he gave him another chance. He came back 15 minutes later. He didn't have it. He knocked him out of the chair again. So then all of a sudden, Edgar hears the voice of that angel in his head. And she says, ask him to let you have a rest for just a few minutes and take the book and put it behind your head and just rest for a few minutes. We'll help you whenever you need help. We'll help you. So he did, and his father said, I'll give you 15 minutes. He goes in the kitchen and Edgar falls asleep on top of the book, and his father comes back. Edgar knew that lesson. He knew the next lesson. He knew everything in the entire book. He knew all the pictures and everything. So that's how Edgar learned, by sleeping on books. Isn't that incredible? So that's how the angels helped him. He went up to the 8th grade, and then he may have gone a little higher before he had to stop to work. Now, so those are some of the formative times in Edgar's life. This guy had so many lifetimes in one life that it's really hard to pinpoint what to talk about, but I'm going to go through the highlights. He met his wife, Gertrude Evans, through an acquaintance when, after Edgar's grandmother died, the squire decided to move the family into the city of Hopkinsville. So they all moved there, and Edgar was there for a short time. He saw an acquaintance who introduced him to Gertrude, who was really beautiful. And he proposed 5.5 years later. They got married when he was 23 years old or so, maybe 25. And they had 2 boys named Hugh Lynn and Edgar Evans. In 1900, when he was 23, the local photographer offered to give Edgar an apprenticeship as a photographer, and he took him up on it. Edgar was such a great portrait photographer over time that he was known as the best portrait photographer in the United States. Can you imagine? I mean, this guy was so talented in so many ways. So he did travel around a lot, not too far. He went like to Dayton. He went to Louisville and in the Kentucky area there, but he didn't travel beyond that point doing photography. But it was at this time that Edgar got laryngitis and he couldn't kick it. And he went to the doctor, and, he's doing readings. He wasn't doing them professionally yet, but he was doing some readings. And the doctors said, I don't see anything wrong with your vocal cords. I don't know why you have laryngitis. So this guy was in town. A guy who lived in town, studied hypnosis and also osteopathy. And he worked with Edgar, and he said, you know what, I'm going to put you in a trance. I'm going to have you go to sleep. And then I'm going to ask you to talk to me, and we're going to figure out this thing. So he puts Edgar to sleep, and Edgar rolls over on his side, and he starts talking to Edgar, and he says, do you see the body? And Edgar says, the body is seen. And all of a sudden, Edgar just starts talking about what's wrong with his vocal cords, why it's happening, and how to fix it. And so then Edgar also said, you must make these specific suggestions to me before you wake up so that the nerves relax and the muscles relax. And that's how Edgar started giving readings, because of what this man did. Edgar, he was clairvoyant. So, today we know he was probably his higher self. He believed it to be God. He just called it his source of information. He didn't really name it. So that's how it started. And people from all over the world would write letters to him and ask him for cures. He didn't really charge people a lot. I mean, if they didn't have money, he didn't charge them. So, he was barely supporting his family. Even with his photography, he was not making a lot of money. That part wasn't important to him, unfortunately for them. But, they lived in a nice home, and they ate, and the kids went to college. But eventually he started dreaming about having a hospital so that he could bring people there and do his cures there. That became an obsession. Edgar must have met up with about 7 or 8 wealthy people in his lifetime who offered to help him raise this money. And what he wanted to earn some of it himself so he could put the down payment on a property. So they would get all these people to come to him, and he would do readings for them but they never really paid him a lot of money. And then these wealthy guys, something would always happen, and they would be in financial ruin within a year's time. So stay away from it. But this happened a number of times. Finally, Edgar did a reading. He was doing readings to find out, well, where should the hospital be? And finally, it was determined in Virginia Beach. So one of the people that Edgar got really close to was Morton Blumenthal, who was a big stock market guy, right? Do you know that name, Blumenthal? Morton Blumenthal and his brother Edwin, and then also a real estate guy named Kahn, Kahn, in New York back in the 1920s. They were very wealthy people. They loved Edgar. They called him their best friend, and they helped him to build a hospital in Virginia Beach. They bought a house for Edgar and his wife. They built the hospital and they built the school, and then guess what? The market crashes. So they had to close the hospital just as it got open, and the school and the university, which is now Atlantic University, was closed, and the Blumenthals and the Kahns disappeared. Well, Hugh Lynn, Edgar's oldest son, started writing a journal every month, and he would send it to the people who were supporters of the association. And over a year's time, he had 300 people who were really, really interested in psychic development and the cures of Edgar Cayce. And they had their first Congress, their meeting, in the summer of 1932. And from there, these people helped to raise the money to buy the property and the hospital and the university. And I'm sure they had a mortgage, but they were able to rebuild the hospital before Edgar died. Now, he died at Virginia Beach in 1945. He was in his 60s, 68, I think. He had emphysema because he did smoke a lot, but he also really worked himself to death. His wife died 3 months after, but Edgar left behind over 14,000 readings that he did. And they're in the Edgar Cayce Center, and people who work for the Association of Research and Enlightenment study these documents and publish all kinds of articles on them. So that's Edgar's life. I mean, his life, he had a really difficult life. And you know what? I think most of us would have given up, really. You know, to have 7 or 8 wealthy people come and say, yes, we're going to support you, and they hit financial ruin. You know, that's kind of I don't know, I would say maybe I shouldn't be doing this. One thing Edgar did when he lived in Dayton, Ohio, when he was a younger man, I think it was before he got married, there were a bunch of doctors living in the rooming house where he was, residents. They were residents at the local hospital, and they would hang out and invite Edgar to join them. And to keep them amused, he created this game. Does anybody remember this game? It was about the stock market. It was about the futures market in Chicago, the Board of Trade. And you wanted to get the corner on the market. And in order to do that, everybody would get so many cards, and you try to get the one suit so that you could get the corner on the market, and everybody's screaming, corn, 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 you know, because you want to give it away, or wheat, wheat, wheat. And it's a hilarious, fun game. He created this game, and the doctor said, oh my God, Edgar, this game is so much fun. You want to sell it to a company. So he sells it to Parker Brothers. They give him $500 for it. This game made lots and lots of money for Parker Brothers, and Edgar filed a lawsuit against them for not paying him enough for the game, for ripping him off. And he lost that lawsuit, unfortunately. But yeah, money was not Edgar's thing. But when Edgar was about 23, so the focus of what I want to talk about tonight, besides Edgar, is something from one of his readings when he was in his 20s. So on July 15, 1928, Edgar was giving a reading, and from his trance state, he said, the spiritual is the life, the mind is the builder, the physical is the result. And this was at that time in America, it was the New Age, Christian Science had already been, Mary Baker Eddy had already died, I think, maybe by the time this kind of stuff, I think she died, I'm not sure. But there were many people before Edgar who were bringing forward these new ideas. It wasn't just church anymore. We were doing other things. And so in, New Age America, this is New Age thinking. And it's not surprising that he would use these words because they were in the consciousness of the country at the time. So as a channeler, I know, actually it happens to me at this group that I channel for sometimes, the minister will do a sermon. And don't you know that almost before I even channel information, I'm getting the download of what I'm going to channel. And it's all about what he's talking about. So when you have, it's in the ethers, so you're going to pick it up. So the spiritual is the life, the mind is the builder, the material is the result. And I call this formula the Holy Trinity of psychic spiritual transformation, because that same formula was channeled by Eva Parekos in the 1980s. It was channeled by Sean DeRohan in the 1980s. She lives in New Mexico, by the way. Dag Hammarskjöld, he talked about this stuff all the time. He lived by that. And A Course in Miracles is all about the spirit is the life, the mind is the builder, the physical is the result. And so the way to use this formula is that Edgar said, what you want to do is have an ideal. So what does he mean by that? He means that your soul is here for a purpose, and your ideal needs to be focused on that purpose. And how do you find that out? Well, you sit down with yourself and you don't ask anybody else, because it has nothing to do with anybody else. You sit down and maybe you start meditating and connect to your soul, or you just sit down and say, you know what? Who are the people who I really admire? They're humble or whatever it is about them. And how did they become that way? It could be Buddha, Jesus, Gandhi. It could be your neighbor who's just very humble and a very kind person. And you try to find out how they became that way. And then you start, and then you write it down, the spiritual, it's the energy that the person has to put into this effort. The mind, it's the thought. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to be creative, and I want to be positive rather than destructive and negative. So I'm looking to be creative. I'm looking to raise my vibration, because at one time I was a spirit and I had a really high vibration. But here I am on planet Earth and I don't have a high vibration. And the point is to raise our consciousness. And that's what Jesus was trying to do when he was here. He was trying to teach these people to learn a little bit more, maybe a lot more than what they knew already about their spiritual life and about the practices that they adhered to. So this is the point, is that and Edgar says that as you work on these things, this ideal is going to change time after time after time, because you're either needing to lower the bar because you're trying to do too much at one time, or you're going to find that you need to raise the bar and you need to focus on other things, other aspects of what your soul needs at the time. So that is my talk on Edgar Cayce. I mean, he talked about Atlantis. He talked about our higher self, our soul. He talked about medicine using all kinds. I mean, he could remote view. That's one thing about him. So I remember he did a reading for somebody far away, and the person said, I can't find what you're telling me I need to have this remedy. And Edgar says, hold on. He writes him a letter. He says, hold on. He remote viewed into that person's pharmacy and found the item on the shelf and told him exactly where he could find it. And the guy went into the store, and don't you know, it was there. And he had already been to the store, and they said they were out of it, but it was there. So he remote viewed. He really, and the man was famous, although nobody would, no doctors or scientists would go and watch him do what he did and say, I was there, I witnessed it, and this guy actually did this. No, they didn't want to do that because they didn't want to be laughed out of their profession. But he was written up in all the major newspapers and magazines of his day. And there was one more thing. And psychic development. He did teach people about psychic development, about that we are all spirit and that we all have these abilities. It's just that we became human and forgot. We forgot. He went into the Akashic records, and that's how he learned that. It's incredible. If you ever read the readings, they're very, they sound like the King James version of the Bible. So people at ARE have translated them a little bit. But when he talks about the Akashic records, you're like, what is he talking about? I don't understand. So sometimes you have to read the readings a couple of times to understand what he's actually saying. But he went into the Akashic records, and that's how he learned so much information, knowing that we have had past lives and that we bring baggage, karma from our past lives. And maybe in this life we're afraid of something and we have no idea. How did I become afraid of spiders like this? Well, it could have been something happened in a past life where maybe you got a spider bite and you died. Who knows? But he's saying that anger, fear, those kinds of things that are we have no idea of why, is usually something from a past life. So he was able to give us that information. Edgar, I don't know that Edgar was incorrect in any of his over 14,000 readings. Everyone, I don't know anybody who said that his readings were not correct, and he read for people who were in other countries. So he was quite the psychic, and he's also known as the father of holistic medicine because of his medical intuitive work. So, this is all, it's interesting. He says, it doesn't matter. You call it whatever you want, source, God, Buddha, Jesus, whatever, but we're all one. It's all one energy. We are part of that energy. And we forget that's part of coming to Earth is that we're here in this school, and it's the most difficult school in the universe. It's the most difficult school in the universe. So don't beat yourself up. And that's why we have so many guides to help us through this life. All we have to do is ask. And all we have to do is be open to it and ask, because I use that kind of stuff all the time and it works for me. So that's what I have for you all on Edgar Cayce, and I appreciate you being here for this.